Have you ever reflected upon how a single line of concrete could imprison an entire culture for nearly 3 decades? This monumental tragedy is officially ranked as the 73rd most significant event in the entirety of human history. The Berlin Wall existed for exactly 10,316 agonizing days, serving as the ultimate symbol of the Cold War. Today, we dissect the anatomy of this barrier and the miraculous spirit that eventually tore it down. We shall journey through the harrowing construction phase, the terrifying death strip, and the peaceful revolution that captivated the world. Prepare yourself for a deep dive into the shadows of a city divided by ideology. Our investigation commences in the aftermath of the Second World War, where the seeds of a global confrontation were sown in rubble. Witness the transformation of an urban center into a front line of the struggle for freedom. This documentary provides a definitive account of the 73rd greatest event in human history, examining every brick and wire. Experience the vivid reality of a city that became the most dangerous place on the planet. Following the total collapse of the Third Reich, the city of Berlin was partitioned into 4 administrative sectors. This division created a unique geopolitical island of Western influence deep within the Soviet-controlled territory. The 3 Western sectors eventually coalesced into a democratic outpost, while the East became the centerpiece of the socialist bloc. This administrative arrangement would soon become the focal point of the global struggle for dominance. During the initial decade of occupation, thousands of people traversed the sector boundaries daily for work and families. The borders remained relatively porous despite the growing ideological friction between the global superpowers and their allies. As the Cold War intensified, the open border in Berlin became a massive liability for the German Democratic Republic. The socialist regime watched with growing alarm as its most talented citizens began to flee toward the West. The socialist state faced a catastrophic existential crisis as millions of its citizens sought refuge in the vibrant West. Approximately 3.5 million individuals fled East Germany during this period of extreme social instability. This massive exodus represented nearly 1/5 of the total population, creating a debilitating brain drain that threatened economic survival. Professionals and intellectuals were among the primary groups seeking a future beyond the socialist regime's control. In late 1961, Walter Ulbricht finally received approval from Moscow to resolve the refugee crisis through physical containment. The plan was executed with total secrecy to prevent a final desperate surge of escapees. Operation Rose was executed with chilling precision under the cover of absolute darkness on the night of August 12th and 13th. Soldiers severed the city's arteries with miles of barbed wire and shattered sections of pavement. By dawn on Sunday morning, the citizens of Berlin awoke to find their city cut in half by a primitive but effective barrier. Thousands of soldiers stood guard, ensuring that no one could cross the line that had been opened just hours before. Families were ripped apart in their sleep as commuters found themselves trapped on whichever side of the line they occupied. The city of Berlin transformed into a massive prison within its own borders over a single night. The Bernauer Straße became a focal point of desperation, where apartment buildings served as the very border of the division. People jumped from third-story windows into nets as guards began to brick up the openings. The primitive wire fences quickly evolved into more permanent structures of cinder blocks and thick mortar during the first phase. This marked the beginning of a progression that would lead to the creation of an impenetrable fortress. By the mid-60s, the second generation of the wall had been completed, featuring concrete slabs and integrated signal systems. The border became a lethal landscape where every attempt at flight was met with overwhelming force. The ultimate version, known as Border Wall 75, consisted of reinforced concrete slabs standing 3.6 meters high. Each segment weighed a staggering 2.75 tons and featured a smooth pipe on top. This smooth pipe was specifically designed to make it impossible for escapees to gain a grip on the top of the barrier. The engineering of the wall reflected a relentless commitment to absolute containment. The dreaded death strip was a lethal obstacle course spanning up to 150 meters between 2 parallel walls. Every inch was meticulously designed to detect and deter any attempt at unauthorized crossing. The signal fence served as the primary electronic detection system within the death strip. This mesh structure was designed to trigger silent alarms in the guard towers if it was touched or climbed. Hidden beneath the fine sand were beds of 14-centimeter steel spikes officially designated as surface obstacles for intruder containment. These cruel devices were intended to impale those who dared to sprint across the zone. 259 dog runs were strategically placed throughout the barrier system, where fierce Alsatians were tethered to long wires. These animals were trained to attack anyone who entered their path. The sand strip was constantly raked to a fine texture to show the slightest footprint of an intruder or a neglecting patrol guard. This psychological weapon ensured that even the most stealthy attempt would leave a visible trace. A network of 302 watchtowers provided a constant, elevated field of observation for guards armed with automatic weapons. From these vantage points, every movement within the death strip was scrutinized with terrifying precision. High-intensity floodlights transformed the nights into artificial days, providing a clear field of fire for guards patrolling the perimeter. The darkness offered no refuge for those attempting to escape the oppressive reach of the state security. East German life was permanently overshadowed by the pervasive and chilling presence of the Stasi secret police organization. Their headquarters stood as a monument to fear and the absolute control of the socialist state. The Stasi maintained endless archives of manila files and magnetic tape reels, documenting the private lives of millions of citizens. Suspicion became a way of survival as neighbors and friends were recruited as informants. Statistically, 1 in every 63 citizens was reporting to the state security apparatus. This internal pressure created a social fabric woven with deep-seated fear and the constant threat of personal betrayal. Chronic shortages of consumer goods defined the daily struggle of life in the East, where basic items were often unavailable for months. Citizens faced long waiting periods for fundamental necessities like bread and produce. Subway lines from the west ran under the east, passing through darkened ghost stations where guards stood in the shadows. These sealed-off platforms were haunting reminders of a city physically connected but ideologically severed. The spirit of resistance ignited in the city of Leipzig at St. Nicholas Church, where prayers for peace became a weekly ritual. Hundreds of people gathered with glowing candles to demand their fundamental human rights. By September 1989, these small meetings erupted into the massive Monday demonstrations. Thousands of protesters marched through the streets, challenging the authority of the socialist regime. The phrase "Wir sind das Volk," we are the people, echoed through the streets, becoming the iconic anthem of the peaceful revolution. The determination of the citizens began to crack the foundation of the state's power. On October 9th, over 70,000 peaceful protesters filled the city square in Leipzig. Despite orders that force might be used, the police stood down, overwhelmed by the sheer number of courageous citizens. The movement peaked on November 4th, when nearly 1 million people gathered at Alexanderplatz in East Berlin. It was the largest demonstration in East German history, demanding reform and the freedom of travel. On the evening of November 9th, GDR official Günter Schabowski prepared for a routine press conference. He was unaware that he was about to deliver the most significant bureaucratic blunder in history. The room was crowded with international journalists and television cameras as Schabowski began to read from his notes. A single question about travel regulations would trigger the collapse of the wall. Unprepared and misinformed, Schabowski famously stammered that the new travel rules would take effect immediately, without delay. The news spread across the globe like wildfire within minutes. East Berliners watched the news in disbelief through shop windows and on their own television sets. The impossible seemed to have happened. The borders were declared open to all citizens. A long line of Trabant cars soon began to form, driving toward the border crossings with their headlights illuminating the dark streets. The people were testing the validity of the announcement. At the Bornholmer Strasse checkpoint, Officer Harald Jäger faced a massive chanting crowd. With no orders from his superiors, he made the courageous decision to independently open the gates. The heavy metal gates of the border crossing slowly swung open, marking the first time in 28 years that citizens could pass freely. The air was filled with cheers and the sounds of celebration. Thousands of jubilant East Berliners streamed into West Berlin, greeted with champagne and applause by their fellow citizens. The first breach of the wall had become an unstoppable tide of humanity. Tearful reunions took place on the streets as families and friends who had been separated for decades finally hugged each other. The night was a blur of emotion and the shared joy of freedom. Soon, wall woodpeckers appeared with hammers and chisels, chipping away at the concrete to claim a piece of history. The physical barrier began to crumble under the weight of thousands of individual blows. Larger segments of the graffiti-covered wall were eventually pulled down by cranes as crowds gathered to watch the symbolic demolition. The Iron Curtain was finally being dismantled in front of the world. Moments of unity were captured everywhere, like silhouettes of West Berliners reaching down to pull their Eastern brothers to the top of the wall. The barrier had become a bridge. The Brandenburg Gate, once trapped in the no man's land, stood fully illuminated and free. A city once divided was now on the path to becoming one again, shaping the future of Europe. The post-war order was established at the Potsdam Conference in 1945, where world leaders Churchill, Truman, and Stalin determined the fate of a defeated Germany. The city was divided into 4 administrative zones. In the ruins of the capital, the rubble women or Trümmerfrauen performed the grueling task of clearing millions of bricks by hand. Their labor symbolized the beginning of a long and painful reconstruction process for the city. The introduction of the Deutsche Mark in 1948 served as a catalyst for the deepening rift between the occupation powers. People queued at banks to exchange their worthless currency for the new Western legal tender. During the Berlin airlift, pilots like Gail Halvorsen, known as the Candy Bomber, dropped small parachutes with sweets for the children below. This act of kindness transformed the former enemies into allies in the eyes of Berliners. Tempelhof Airport became the lifeline of the city, with Skymaster planes landing every few minutes to deliver coal and food. The successful airlift proved that the western sectors could not be starved into submission by the blockade. East German scientists and intellectuals were among the first to seek opportunities in the West, contributing to a severe intellectual vacuum. This exodus of talent threatened the socialist state's ambitious industrial goals. Before the wall, early border guards patrolled sector boundaries that were often marked only by simple signs and wooden barriers. The porous nature of these lines allowed for a constant flow of people and ideas between the two systems. Berliners frequently used the S-Bahn and U-Bahn networks to cross between East and West for work or family visits. These transit lines represented the last remaining connections in a city that was rapidly being pulled apart. As thousands fled daily, entire apartment blocks in East Berlin stood empty, their residents having left everything behind for a chance at freedom. These silent rooms were haunting evidence of the growing existential crisis. The construction of Stalin Alley was intended to showcase the architectural superiority of the socialist system with massive apartment palaces. However, the project could not hide the mounting economic pressures and social discontent. The iconic leap of soldier Konrad Schumann over the barbed wire became a global symbol of the desperate desire to escape the closing border. His courage was captured in a moment that defined the early days of the wall's history. Massive coils of razor-sharp barbed wire were stockpiled across the city as the regime prepared to seal the remaining gaps in the perimeter. The transition from wire to concrete would soon follow, solidifying the city's division. The original wooden guard shack at Checkpoint, Charlie stood as the main crossing point for foreigners and diplomats. It was the stage for some of the most intense military standoffs of the entire Cold War era. West Berliners frequently used wooden ladders to peer over the wall and wave to their relatives who remained trapped in the East. These simple tools were the only means of visual contact for families separated by the barrier. Memorial wreaths and bouquets were often placed along the western side of the wall to honor those who lost their lives attempting to cross. Each tribute represented a human tragedy within the larger geopolitical conflict. Anti-tank hedgehog obstacles were strategically placed within the death strip to prevent heavy vehicles from ramming through the barriers. These steel structures added another layer of lethal defense to the border system. The interior of the guard dog kennels revealed the organized nature of the state's deterrent system. Hundreds of trained animals were prepared to patrol the dog runs and attack any intruder within the no man's land. Specialized binocular telescopes were mounted in every watchtower, providing guards with a crystal-clear view of both the death strip and the western streets. No movement escaped the watchful eyes of the border troops. Night patrols were a constant presence in the death strip, with soldiers using high-powered flashlights to search for any signs of an escape attempt. The darkness was no shield against the vigilance of the state. The raking machine was a specialized tractor designed to create perfectly uniform ridges in the sand strip. These ridges were monitored daily to detect any footprints, ensuring that even the smallest breach was recorded. The Stasi utilized a massive index card system containing millions of individual records to track every citizen's activities. This bureaucratic machine was the engine of the surveillance state's total control over society. Magnetic tape recorders were used extensively for wiretapping telephone lines and rooms across East Berlin. This technology allowed the secret police to capture the private conversations of any suspected dissenters. Bleak interrogation rooms with single harsh lamps were designed to break the will of those arrested by the Stasi. The psychological pressure applied in these spaces was a cornerstone of the regime's tactics. Informants frequently met their Stasi handlers in public spaces like parks to provide intelligence on their colleagues and families. This network of betrayal eroded trust within the very core of East German society. Concealed cameras hidden inside everyday objects like briefcases allowed Stasi agents to document meetings and individuals without their knowledge. No part of civilian life was truly safe from the state's lens. In the shadow of the concrete wall, East German children grew up in a world where the division of their city was a permanent and unremarkable part of the landscape. Their simple games were often played within sight of the watchtowers. The western side of the wall became a canvas for political expression and artistic rebellion, covered in vibrant graffiti from top to bottom. These murals stood in stark contrast to the bleak uniform gray of the East. In 1987, David Bowie's concert in West Berlin sent his music echoing over the wall to the east, where thousands gathered to listen from the shadows. The power of culture began to transcend the physical barriers of the Cold War. East German scientists and intellectuals were among the first to seek opportunities in the West, contributing to a severe intellectual vacuum. This exodus of talent threatened the socialist state's ambitious industrial goals. Mikhail Gorbachev's visit to East Berlin in 1989 signaled a shift in Soviet policy that would change the world. His message of reform encouraged the growing movement for democracy within the GDR. Candlelit vigils at churches like Gethsemane became centers of peaceful resistance, where citizens gathered to pray for freedom and the end of the division. The flickering lights represented a growing hope that the wall would soon fall. East German border guards found themselves in an impossible position as the protests grew, facing thousands of their own citizens with no clear orders from their superiors. Their uncertainty mirrored the collapse of the state's authority. Families across East Berlin gathered around their television sets on the night of November 9th, witnessing the historic press conference that changed their lives forever. The impossible dream of freedom was suddenly becoming a reality. The first physical contact between East and West Berliners at the open checkpoints was a moment of profound emotional release. Hands reached out to touch across the barrier that had separated families for nearly 3 decades. Dozens of people climbed to the top of the wall at the Brandenburg Gate, dancing and celebrating in a scene that would become one of the most iconic images of the 20th century. The wall had lost its power. The exchange of fresh bananas across the borderline became a symbolic gesture of the end of the consumer shortages that had defined life in the East. Simple acts of sharing represented the reunification of a people. Throughout the night, the sound of hammers and chisels filled the air as wall woodpeckers began to dismantle the concrete barrier piece by piece. Each chip removed was a step toward a unified Berlin. In 1990, the removal of the wooden guard shack at Checkpoint Charlie symbolized the final dismantling of the Cold War's most famous crossing. The physical structures of the division were being cleared away. Chancellor Helmut Kohl's walk through the newly opened Brandenburg Gate in December 1989 marked a formal recognition of the wall's end. The path to German reunification was now officially open. On the night of October 3, 1990, massive fireworks erupted over the Reichstag building to celebrate the formal reunification of Germany. A nation once divided was now officially one again. Today, single segments of the Berlin Wall stand as memorials in parks across the city, serving as powerful reminders of the cost of division and the ultimate triumph of the human spirit. The legacy of the wall remains. The disintegration of the Berlin Wall serves as an eternal testament to the fact that no physical barrier can permanently suppress the spirit. It stands as a powerful beacon of hope for all nations currently enduring the pain of division. Until our next exploration into the annals of history, we wish you peace and prosperity across all the borders of the world. 구독과 좋아요를 눌러주세요. 감사합니다.